Lena Carter thought she had found the perfect man in Drew Madden, charming, attentive, and just mysterious enough to be intriguing. But as her best friend, Tasha Wynn, begins to uncover disturbing secrets about Drew's past, a quiet sense of dread creeps in. Then comes Eli Trent, a haunted man with a connection to a woman named Claire Hastings, who vanished without a trace after dating someone just like Drew. As Lena sleeps beside the man who's planning her murder, the clock ticks down toward a night that will decide who survives and who disappears forever. Lena Carter always believed that everything happened for a reason. So when she met Drew Madden at a housewarming party in early spring, she thought fate had finally given her something good. The air was filled with music and laughter, warm fairy lights strung across the backyard. Drew wasn't loud or overly confident like the other guests. He stood slightly apart, nursing a drink, watching the crowd with quiet amusement. That alone made him stand out to Lena, who was tired of dating loud men who needed to be the center of attention. He introduced himself, simply. No cheesy pickup lines, no over-the-top compliments. Just a smile that made you feel like he already knew your secrets and was okay with them. They talked for hours that night, standing in a dim corner of the patio, away from the buzz of conversations. By the end of the evening, Lena had given him her number and a piece of her heart she didn't realize was missing. Things moved quickly after that. Drew was attentive, almost perfectly so. He remembered the little things she mentioned in passing, how she liked her coffee, her favorite color, the way she hated Sundays because they made her feel restless. He sent her good morning messages every day before she woke up. Flowers arrived at her apartment without a name on the card. He claimed he just liked making her smile, and he did. At least in the beginning. Friends started noticing her absence from group outings. Lena, who used to be the glue of every brunch or movie night, now texted apologies minutes before events. Drew planned a surprise dinner, she'd say. Or, I'm just tired, next time for sure. Tasha Wynn, her best friend since college, raised her eyebrows but said nothing at first. She didn't want to be the cynical friend who ruined a happy relationship. Lena seemed happy, that was what mattered. Or so she told herself. Drew, meanwhile, was an enigma. He never talked about his family, brushing off questions with vague statements about a complicated past. He said he did freelance tech consulting, but Lena never saw him actually working. He had no online presence, no Instagram, no Facebook, not even a LinkedIn. Lena asked once, jokingly, if he was in witness protection. He laughed, but his eyes didn't. It was the kind of laugh that ends too fast. Still, Lena ignored the doubts. She told herself everyone had their quirks, and not everyone was addicted to social media. Maybe he just valued his privacy. In a world that overshared everything, that almost felt noble. But things started shifting in subtle ways. Drew always wanted to know where she was. At first it was sweet. Text me when you get home. But later, it became, who were you with? How long were you there? Why didn't you answer earlier? It wasn't aggressive, at least not in tone, but the questions were sharp and frequent, and always paired with intense eye contact that made Lena feel like she was being studied. When she brought up boundaries, he apologized. Genuinely, he blamed a past relationship for making him insecure. He promised to be better, and for a while he was. The sweetness returned. Dates resumed, the intensity lowered, and Lena convinced herself she was overthinking everything. Maybe love just took work. Maybe vulnerability felt like fear until you got used to it. But beneath the warmth and charm, something was beginning to rot. Drew's silences grew heavier. He stayed up late, staring at his computer screen with unreadable expressions. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night and find him standing near the window just watching the street outside. When she asked what he was doing, he smiled and said, "Just thinking." Lena smiled back, but a quiet voice deep in her mind whispered that something wasn't right. She ignored it. After all, fate had brought Drew into her life, and fate didn't make mistakes, right? She didn't realize yet that fate wasn't what brought them together. Drew did. Carefully. Intentionally. And with a plan. Tasha Wynn, had always trusted her instincts. And lately, something about Lena's relationship didn't sit right. It wasn't anything dramatic. No screaming fights, no visible bruises, just a slow, quiet change in her best friend's energy. Lena, once vibrant and talkative, now spoke like she was filtering her words before letting them out. She smiled less. Her phone was always face down on the table, and most of all, she had developed a habit of looking over her shoulder, even when there was no reason to. At first, Tasha told herself it was just the normal evolution of a new relationship. People get wrapped up in their partners, but the changes were too consistent, too gradual and too precise to be coincidence. It was as if someone had studied Lena's rhythms and then slowly rewired her. She remembered one specific evening when Lena came over for dinner. Tasha had made pasta, Lena's favorite, but Lena barely touched her plate. She kept checking the time. "Drew wants to watch a movie," she said, "and he gets annoyed when I'm late." It in itself wasn't alarming, until she added, "He tracks my location, but only because he worries." She said it like it was normal, like it was sweet. Tasha's stomach turned. She asked Lena if she was okay, but Lena just smiled weakly and said, "I know him better than anyone. He's just protective." Later that night, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling. She opened her laptop and started looking into Drew Madden, but there was almost nothing to find. No social media, no business listings, no college records she could match. It was strange. Most people had at least some digital footprint. Drew, though, was like a ghost, a name and a face with no history behind them. She tried asking Lena subtle questions. Where Drew grew up, what his parents did, whether he had siblings. Lena always gave short, incomplete answers. "He's not close with his family. He moved around a lot. He doesn't really talk about his past." It was as if Lena herself didn't know the full story, and the more Tasha thought about it, the more that frightened her. One afternoon, Tasha noticed something unusual. Lena rolled up her sleeve without thinking, and there was a faint bruise along the inside of her arm. It looked like the shape of fingers. Tasha asked about it immediately, and Lena stiffened, tugging her sleeve down with a forced laugh. "I fell at the gym," she said. "Dumb, right?" That was the moment Tasha knew something was wrong. Not just unusual or suspicious, but truly, deeply wrong. She began keeping a journal of every odd thing Lena told her. Every strange text, every missed outing, every odd excuse. She started checking news archives for any mention of Drew Madden, just in case. Still nothing. Then, late one night, she tried something different. She searched the name Claire Hastings. A girl Lena once mentioned had dated Drew before they met. Tasha didn't know why the name stuck in her head, but it had. She typed it into a local missing persons database, more out of desperation than expectation. And there it was. Claire Hastings, 25, went missing 3 years ago. Last seen leaving a cafe with an unidentified male companion. The blurry photo in the police file wasn't clear, but something about the man's frame and posture looked familiar. Tasha stared at it for a long time, heart thudding harder with each passing second. She copied the photo and sent it to herself. Then she clicked back through Lena's recent pictures. There weren't many, but in one group shot from a restaurant, Drew was standing just off to the side. Same build, same stance, same cold, detached look. The man in the missing persons report and Drew Madden might be the same person, or they might not be. But either way, Tasha was no longer willing to stay quiet. She didn't know it yet, but she had just taken the first step into a much darker story than she could ever have imagined. A story where curiosity could be dangerous, and silence could be fatal. Eli Trent hadn't spoken to Drew Madden in over 3 years. He'd tried to erase that part of his life, bury it deep beneath routine jobs, late-night drinking, and the quiet hum of isolation. But that night, sitting in his dark apartment with a single lamp casting long shadows on the wall, he made a mistake. He looked her up. Her name was Lena Carter. He'd come across her by accident, scrolling through a mutual acquaintance photo, Drew's face appearing unexpectedly in the background. standing behind a woman with warm eyes and a bright, careless smile. That smile chilled Eli to his core, because he recognized the same innocence, the same blind trust that he'd seen before. Claire had smiled like that, too. For hours, Eli stared at Lena's profile, his mind spinning. It wasn't just concern, it was dread. Drew had done it once. He was methodical, manipulative, and patient. He didn't hurt people in a moment of anger. He prepared, watched, and waited. And when the moment came, he struck without hesitation. The last time Eli saw Drew, it had been in the dead of night, their clothes stained with mud and something worse. That memory had never stopped haunting him. He told himself he wasn't responsible. He hadn't killed anyone, but he had helped. He hadn't gone to the police, and now, someone else was in danger. Eli opened a new message on his old burner phone, the only number Drew hadn't blocked over the years, and typed a warning. "I saw her, just like the last one." He sent it without expecting a reply. But an hour later, his phone buzzed. "Don't interfere." That was all it said. But the tone was unmistakable, calm, cold, final. Drew wasn't worried, he was in control, just like always. Eli wanted to believe it wasn't too late. Maybe Lena would see the signs, maybe she'd get out on her own. But then he remembered how Drew worked. He didn't show his darkness all at once. He was careful, patient. He wrapped himself around his victims like ivy, quietly suffocating them under the illusion of care. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. He paced the room, battling indecision. Going to the police would mean confessing everything, his role in Claire's disappearance, the night in the woods, the buried secrets he'd spent years trying to forget. But staying silent meant risking another woman's life, possibly more. Eli opened the old file he'd saved on a thumb drive, the one he never meant to look at again. Photos, maps, notes from Claire's last known days. Back then, he and Drew had created a whole system of lies to cover their tracks. Fake locations, erased texts. Drew had been the mastermind. Eli had just followed out of fear, but this time felt different. Maybe it was the way Lena looked, so full of hope, completely unaware that she was living next to something monstrous. Maybe it was the fact that Drew didn't seem afraid of consequences anymore. That made him more dangerous than ever. Eli printed the photo he found of Lena and pinned it on the wall above his desk. He added a timeline, a list of Drew's known aliases, the storage unit they used to rent outside of town. If no one else would do it, Eli would. He'd expose Drew, he'd stop him. But time was running out. Eli didn't know where Drew's plan had reached. All he knew was that Lena had already stepped into the same trap Claire had fallen into, and the cage was beginning to close. And if Eli failed to act this time, there might not be another chance to make it right. Drew Madden believed in precision. To him, chaos was for the desperate and unprepared. He was neither. Every decision he made followed a sequence, every action guided by a blueprint he kept entirely in his head. By the time anyone noticed something was wrong, he would already be gone. Just like last time, Lena Carter, to him, was not a person, she was a process. From the moment he met her, he had mapped out how it would end. Not in an emotional burst of violence, but in silence and strategy. The kind that left no trace. The kind he had perfected. He started subtly. A suggestion here. A question there. Slowly, he isolated Lena from her support system, without her even noticing. When she declined a brunch invitation, he'd reward her with affection. When she spent a weekend away with Tasha, he grew distant, cold. She learned, unconsciously, how to keep him close, how to avoid his disappointment. In return, Drew gave her curated affection, always enough to make her think things were fine, always just short of real warmth. Lena's apartment became his territory. Without her permission, he had duplicated her keys, installed discreet surveillance. A miniature camera in the bookshelf, another one near her front door, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Her phone was easier. While she slept one night, He installed a tracking app disguised as a system update. Within minutes, he could see her every move in real time. She had no idea. Each day, Drew documented her habits. What time she left for work. How long she spent in the gym. How many stops she made on her way home. Every pattern, every change, was noted. Routine meant control. Control meant success. When she started asking more questions about his past, about his lack of family, he gently steered the conversation away. If she pressed, he gave her just enough to quiet her instincts. A troubled childhood. Estranged parents. Things she couldn't verify. But that made her feel sorry for him. Pity was a powerful tool. She stopped digging. Meanwhile, Drew spent his nights driving. His destination was a storage unit 2 towns over, registered under the name Jason Morley, a false identity he'd created years ago using a forged license and a now-dead email account. Inside the unit was a carefully maintained collection of supplies, plastic sheeting, rope, gloves, and a medical-grade chemical he'd obtained through a connection in the biotech industry. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't theatrical, but it worked. He reviewed the plan nightly, checking for weak points. He'd learned from the past. Claire had taught him that trust could be miscalculated. This time, he'd taken every precaution. Lena was far more trusting, more isolated, and unlike Claire, Lena didn't seem to have that moment of doubt, the look in the eyes that said, "I know something's wrong. Not yet anyway." One night, Drew tested her. He left a burner phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while he stepped into the shower. It had no password, no contacts, no photos, just one text message, in the inbox, "Ready when you are." When he came back, the phone hadn't moved. He checked the screen, no new activity. She hadn't looked, or if she had, she didn't understand what she saw. He smiled. She still trusted him. He estimated he had less than 2 weeks before someone, Tasha, probably started asking real questions. He had to move before then. The plan was already set. Lena's routines were predictable. Her schedule that Friday night would take her on a quiet drive home from her design client's place, through the stretch of wooded highway where there were no cameras, no lights. He'd already walked the route. He knew the exact blind turn where her car would veer off, seemingly on its own. By the time they found it, if they ever did, she would be gone. And Drew would be somewhere new, with a different name and a new plan, just like before. Tasha Wynn couldn't sleep. Not anymore. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Lena's face, smiling, trusting, completely unaware of what loomed just beneath the surface of her so-called perfect relationship. And the man standing next to her in every memory now felt like a ticking time bomb. Drew Madden wasn't just odd. He wasn't just secretive. He was dangerous. The missing persons case of Claire Hastings had become her obsession. Tasha read through every article, every forum post, even the comments under local news videos. Most people had forgotten Claire. But a few amateur sleuths kept the conversation alive. Among them, someone using the alias Ghost Unit 7 had posted cryptic messages about Claire's disappearance. One, dated 6 months earlier, simply read, "He never stopped, just got smarter." Tasha responded, not expecting anything. She asked for details. Anything that might link Drew to Claire's disappearance. The reply came 6 hours later. "I know what he did. You're too close. Get your friend out." There was no name, no offer of proof. But it shook Tasha. Someone out there was watching too, someone who knew more. She decided to dig deeper. If Drew was using an alias, there had to be a paper trail, something he missed. She filed a request for public records under his supposed name. The address on his lease led to a mailbox forwarding service. His phone number wasn't listed to any known carrier. His driver's license, Lena had shown it once as a joke, was from a state he'd never even lived in. Piece by piece, the story unraveled. Still, she couldn't confront Lena outright. Not yet. She'd tried once before, asking if Drew ever scared her. Lena had brushed it off. "He's intense, but he loves me. It was the kind of response you gave when you were too deep to see the edges anymore. Tasha needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that would make Lena run. She decided to follow him. That Friday night, Tasha parked 2 blocks from Lena's apartment. Drew's car, a dark gray sedan, pulled out at 7:42 p.m., right on schedule. Lena wasn't with him. Tasha followed at a distance, careful not to get too close. He didn't drive toward the usual restaurants or bars. Instead, he took a winding route out of town, turning onto a highway that cut through dense woodland. After 40 minutes of careful tracking, he pulled off onto a gravel road and disappeared behind a locked gate. Tasha parked her car far enough back not to be seen and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. No one else arrived. She slipped out, camera in hand, and made her way through the brush to a hill overlooking the lot. Below, Drew was opening the door to a storage unit. She couldn't see everything clearly, but the glow of a lantern cast long, eerie shadows across the concrete. Drew moved with purpose, taking out what looked like a tarp, a black duffel bag, and something metallic she couldn't identify. She took photos, her hands trembling. This wasn't normal. This wasn't innocent. A twig snapped beneath her foot. Drew stopped moving. Tasha ducked low, heart pounding so hard she felt sick. She stayed completely still, barely breathing. After a long pause, Drew returned to his task. But she knew now, he wasn't just preparing for something. He was ready. She crawled back to her car, clutching the camera like a lifeline. Her breath was shallow, her thoughts raced. She had enough to make Lena listen now. Maybe enough to go to the police. But there was a new fear blooming inside her. Drew wasn't paranoid. He was watchful. If he noticed her once, he might already know someone was onto him. And people who knew too much had a habit of disappearing. Lena Carter stood by her apartment window, watching the streetlights flicker in the growing dusk. There was a strange stillness in the air, the kind that made her feel as if something were about to happen, though she couldn't say what. She had always been good at brushing off unease, convincing herself she was overthinking, that the tension in her chest was just a symptom of stress. But lately, that quiet discomfort had grown into something she couldn't ignore. Her routine had changed, though not by choice. Drew no longer let her walk to work alone. He always offered to drive her or insisted she take a rideshare he'd booked himself. Her phone battery seemed to drain faster than usual, and apps would open without her touching them. When she asked Drew about it, he would say, "Phones do weird things when they're overloaded," and then he'd change the subject. Her keys had gone missing last week, only to appear the next morning on her nightstand. A pair of earrings vanished from her dresser. When she mentioned it, Drew said she must have misplaced them. "You've been tired," he reminded her. "You forget things when you're tired." Maybe he was right. Or maybe something else was happening. Something she didn't want to face. That afternoon, Tasha showed up unexpectedly. Her eyes were wide, her words rushed. She handed Lena a folder filled with photographs. Blurry images, but unmistakable. Drew, standing in front of a storage unit. Drew, holding something wrapped in plastic. Lena flipped through them slowly, her hands trembling. "I followed him," Tasha said, voice low. "He's not who he says he is. That storage unit? It's under a fake name. And I think he's planning something. Something terrible." Lena wanted to reject it, to defend him. But a part of her, the part she'd been silencing for weeks, whispered that Tasha might be right. She remembered the first time she'd seen Drew truly angry. It hadn't been loud. It had been cold, controlled. His voice hadn't even risen, but his eyes had gone flat, as if he had turned something off inside. She began to see it all differently now. The possessiveness masked as affection, the manipulation disguised as concern. Drew hadn't changed. She just hadn't seen him clearly until now. Lena promised Tasha she would leave. That night, no more excuses. But Drew came home early. She tried to act normal, keeping her voice light, her eyes steady. He asked about her day, made dinner and smiled like nothing had changed. But she saw it now. The performance, the calculation. She told him she wasn't feeling well and went to bed early, locked the door behind her, packed a small bag and hid it under the bed. Her heart pounded so loudly, she thought he might hear it through the walls. At 3:12 a.m., she slipped out the window. The fire escape was cold beneath her feet, and the street was eerily silent. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. Tasha was waiting 3 blocks away, engine running, eyes scanning every shadow. Lena climbed into the car without a word. They drove in silence, heading for a motel an hour outside the city. Lena stared straight ahead, her fingers clenched around the bag in her lap. She didn't know where Drew was. She didn't know what he had planned. But she knew this: she wasn't safe. And she wasn't sure if she ever had been. Eli Trent had been watching the motel from a distance for hours, hidden behind the wheel of a borrowed car parked in the back lot of a closed gas station. He didn't want to be there. He hated this part. The waiting, the watching, the cold sweat of dread crawling up the back of his neck, but he had no choice anymore. Drew was accelerating, and Lena Carter was running out of time. Through the motel office window, he could see her. She moved like someone trying to pretend everything was okay, but Eli recognized the signs: short, tight steps, head down, always glancing toward exits. Fear wasn't new to him. He'd lived in its shadow for years, but Lena's fear wasn't the panicked kind. It was the quiet, heavy kind that told him she'd finally started to see the truth. The same truth Claire had realized far too late. He had left a note for her under the front desk that morning. A simple message: "You're not crazy. He's done this before." Room 107, midnight. It was a risk, maybe even a mistake, but he needed her to hear it from someone who had been there, someone who had once helped Drew do the unthinkable and regretted it every single day since. Midnight came, and the door to room 107 creaked open. Lena stood there, hesitant, clutching the strap of her bag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Eli stepped out of the shadows slowly, showing his hands first. He knew how he looked: tired, older than his years, haunted, but he wasn't here to scare her. He told her the truth. He told her about Claire Hastings, about the long drives, the slow manipulation, about the night it all ended. Drew had made it look like an accident, but it wasn't. Claire had tried to leave, and Drew had planned her disappearance down to the minute. Eli had helped clean up, dug the hole, burned the clothes. He was part of the reason Claire's body was never found. Lena didn't speak for a long time. She sat on the edge of the bed, unmoving, as if trying to absorb the weight of what she'd just heard. Eventually, she asked one question: "Why are you telling me this now?" Eli's answer was simple: "Because I didn't stop him last time. And I can't live with that again." Suddenly, a car engine roared outside. Eli's heart seized. He moved to the window, peeking through the curtain. Drew's sedan. He was here. Somehow he'd found him. Eli swore under his breath. Lena backed away from the door instinctively, her face pale. He motioned for her to stay quiet. They had minutes, maybe less. Drew's footsteps echoed across the lot. Steady, slow, deliberate. He wasn't panicking. He was hunting. Eli grabbed the duffel bag he kept under the bed. Inside, a burner phone, cash, and a weapon he prayed he wouldn't have to use. He passed Lena the phone and whispered a name. "Tasha, call her. Tell her to go to the police. Now." Outside, the footsteps stopped. Then 3 sharp knocks on the door. "Lena," came the voice from the other side. Calm, unshaken. "I know you're in there. Let's talk." Eli stepped in front of the door. His pulse thundered in his ears. He didn't know how this would end. But for the first time in years, he wasn't going to run. Drew Madden stood on the other side of the thin motel door, unmoving, his breath slow and measured. He wasn't here to talk. He already knew Lena had been slipping away. Her energy had changed. Her eyes no longer softened when she looked at him. That meant the plan had to change. Accelerate. Clean up. He was prepared for this. Inside the room, Eli pressed his back against the wall, the pistol heavy in his hand. He hadn't touched a weapon since the night they buried Claire Hastings. but muscle memory came rushing back like a dark tide. He didn't know what Drew was going to do, but he knew what Drew was capable of. That mattered more. Lena crouched in the corner, her phone pressed against her ear, whispering into it. Tasha answered almost immediately. Eli could hear the disbelief in her voice through the receiver as Lena said, "He found us. Send help." Outside, silence. Then the door handle jiggled, gently at first, then harder. Drew was testing it, pushing boundaries, like always. And then he stopped. For a full minute, nothing happened. The quiet was worse than the noise. Lena's breathing was quick and shallow. Eli's finger tightened on the trigger. A loud crash shattered the moment. The side window exploded inward in a cascade of glass. Drew's figure appeared in the shattered frame, already halfway inside. He moved with terrifying speed, eyes locked not on Lena but on Eli. It was a blur. Eli fired once. The sound was deafening in the small room. Drew staggered back, struck in the shoulder, falling into the dresser with a heavy thud. Blood bloomed across his jacket, but he didn't scream. He didn't speak. He just stared at Eli with something like contempt, as if he was disappointed more than hurt. But he wasn't finished. He lunged forward, knocking Eli off balance, slamming him into the wall with surprising force for someone who'd just been shot. The gun skidded across the floor. Lena screamed. In the chaos, she grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and smashed it into Drew's back. He twisted, elbowed her away, and turned back toward Eli. They struggled, grappling, fists swinging, rage colliding with guilt. Eli found the gun again. Another shot rang out. Drew collapsed. This time he didn't move. The room went quiet except for Lena's sobs and Eli's ragged breathing. Outside, the sound of distant sirens rose, growing louder. Tasha had done it. She'd called in time. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights bathed the walls. Police flooded the lot. Lena was wrapped in a blanket, barely speaking. Eli sat in the back of a squad car, not in handcuffs, but not free either. He told the officers everything, about Claire, about the storage unit, about the plan. It was over. The next day, news stations ran the story of a motel confrontation turned violent, featuring vague details and grainy photos of Drew Madden's face. But they didn't know the half of it. Most wouldn't care. Just another headline. Just another tragedy avoided by a split-second decision. Lena never went back to her apartment. She disappeared for a while, left town, started over somewhere quiet. Tasha remained close, always checking in. They didn't talk about Drew, not directly. Some things were too heavy to revisit. Eli spent weeks in interviews, helping police uncover Drew's trail of aliases, false identities, and secret accounts. He never asked for a deal. He never expected forgiveness. But in the end, he got something he hadn't had in years. A second chance. Some nightmares end in screams. Others end in silence. And this one ended with a locked door, a shot in the dark, and a woman who finally saw the truth before it was too late.